This morning we have one scripture we'll look at. It's from the book of Revelation, chapter 21. And in case you were wondering, my son recognizes that I am pastor here, but also I'm still his dad no matter where I sit or stand. And he wanted to have a conversation with me about a T-Rex, but I told him we could talk more about that later on. So hopefully that can wait. So this is going to be from Revelation chapter 21, starting in verse 1. We read verses 1 through 7. It'll be on the overheads in front of you. It's on page 878 in the Pew Bibles. Listen now for the word of the Lord. And then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, which is coming down out from heaven, from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people. He will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them, and he will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, no more mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." And then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true." He said to me, "It is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost, from the spring of the water of life. And those who are victorious will inherit all of this. And I will be their God, and they will be my children." This morning I've got a sermon for you that I've entitled "Hopefully Ever After." It's a little bit of a pun or play on words like happily ever after. But I didn't want to put the word hopefully because I didn't want you to think of hopefully there's an ever after. No, I'm saying hopefully, have fullness of hope in the ever after. This sermon's inspired because, I'm a consumer of mass media like most of you. Only a lot of times I do it in ways that are a little different, or in ways that are a little more for entertainment value. I spend a lot of time during my weeks, whether I'm getting prepared for sermons or visiting people or dealing with issues of health and people's struggles. I spend a lot of time working with individual people, talking about serious things. I spend a lot of time when I prepare for sermons, not only studying scripture, but also going to resources in the news to study about very serious issues that grapple this world. And so it may not surprise you that when I go to have free time or time that I spend more for leisure, I do things that some might call either self-nourishing or replenishing, or a little bit of escapism from the realities of this world, to try and give my mind and my body a break so that I might be refreshed and renewed to return back to this kind of work. One of those things that I do is a lot of outdoor activities. In this time of year, it's hunting or hiking. Sometimes in the warmer months, it's fishing or kayaking. Sometimes I do these things with other people, sometimes on my own. But I also spend a lot of time when I'm not out on a daylight adventure, when it's in the evening or when it's rainy out, consuming either different books or stories. I love stories. It's probably not terribly surprising. I like to, a big part of my job in preaching, I think, is sort of storytelling for a purpose. And so I spend time reading different stories and watching different stories in television shows or in movies. I like the genres in particular of science fiction and fantasy. And I like them because historically they've been stories, they've been ideas that sort of take you out of the norm, put you in a place that obviously doesn't exist, and people have different abilities and powers, or different creatures or aliens or things exist that aren't in our real world. And it's been a historical place for me of stepping out of the usual, stepping out of this universe into one that doesn't exist, because they have stories that are different from what our reality is, and they have many times a hope, a mechanisms of abilities or science realities that don't exist in this world yet or may never exist at all. And it gives you different visions of how people and creatures might approach life in this world were we to have those other powers, abilities, or technologies. But in looking at a lot of those stories and consuming some of them via, Jenny and I sort of cut the cable cord a couple of years back, but we still pay for some online access to things like Netflix and Amazon Prime, and we use those when we sit down to watch a TV show once in a blue moon, when both of us aren't really tired and go to bed early or Owen's not up too late. If we actually watch a show together, it's one of those kinds of shows, or the occasional movie through the internet, or once in a while even in a movie theater. And I've noticed something that I think is implication of the culture that we're currently living in. Notice something in the mass media and the stories that we're telling, not only to ourselves but to our children, that is a different path from the way those stories were told when I was being upbrought in this country. I was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, and become an adult in the 21st century, and I've seen the way these stories are reflected be modified. We took some of the stories from the generations past and they became popular culture, and with people like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and some of the Lord of the Rings and the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series, and some of those had these deeper-seated visions of other worlds and fantasy, but with a core and a purpose and a message of hope that went beyond hope. Even our superhero stories, from the comics that I read when I was a little kid to the cartoons that they put on TV with some of them in it, that there's a deeper message about people being able to do things beyond their reality, about a reason to hope, even when hope seemed to be gone. And yet, in this time, in this age, when I look around and I consume some of this media, I see it more and more. We see stories of dystopias, stories of apocalypse, where viruses have ruined the earth, and the only people left that are sane in their minds are people that struggle with zombie humans or with a decimated earth after a nuclear apocalypse. Or more and more you see stories where even the superheroes that are there are being killed at the end of them. One of my favorite superheroes, I understand what's happening. I understand some of these actors that are in these movies are aging, and so that as they get older, they're dealing with the reality of what that actor looks like. They're also reflecting some of what's happening in our culture, but they took one of my favorite superheroes and they made one of the things that made him strong and made it into the thing that caused him cancer. In the last Hollywood movie of his character, he dies, and dies for good. And in so many of these stories now, whether it's oriented at preteens or teens or at young adults or adults who have known these stories for generations, it's not just escapism anymore. It's a reflection of the reality around. You see, we live in this world where, for the majority of American time frame of America being America, we kept seeing a brighter hope, a vision for the future where our children were going to have more and possess better technology and be better off than the generations that came before them. And now we're dealing finally with a reality where that might not be true. We're dealing with the reality that the world has no longer got wild places to send our next generation to. There's no further west to go, young man or young woman. There's no new land to be conquered, no place to be displaced on this earth. That people are connected around the globe more than ever, that stories are being told around the globe more than ever, and yet the globe itself is threatened in a new way by the very people that live on it. I heard a statistic recently that in the last 50 years, the human population has more than doubled. There's more people alive now than ever before, and yet the earth seems smaller, more connected, more ability to know what each other is thinking, and yet people feel more isolated. In spite of all that connection, all that technology, all that knowledge, all of the people around us, young people in droves feel more and more depression by feeling isolated in the masses. I get what's happening in these stories, where they see a world threatened through all kinds of new means, whether it's war, or whether it's climate change, or whether it's pollution, or whether it's use and overuse of the resources, whether it's the forests being burned or cut down. Whatever these stories are, they all get to the same point. And this is simply a reality that art has always had, that art often reflects culture, often reflects realities of the world around, and we're just seeing it more and more in our art forms. whether it be from Hollywood or in these TV shows or whatever else, in the books that are written for whatever age range. We're seeing it more and more. And this is the question that I have for all of you. The question that I have is that when art more and more reflects the difficulties of the reality around, when our heroes are literally being killed in our stories, when our stories of fantasy and out there realities are more and more dystopias, even for our preteens and our teens, when they're broken worlds, when they're apocalypses, where is the hope in the midst of all of that? Where is the hope that goes beyond hope? Where is the vision for a future that is brighter than the reality in which we live? Where is the possibility, even when possibility seems dead? And this is the core of your message this morning, brothers and sisters. In a world that keeps throwing away the old hope, in a world that keeps reflecting the difficulty and the darkness of the realities around us, in a world that has taken faith, and even the faith that we say in something beyond this world and say it's not real and it's dead, it should not surprise you, therefore, that the sickness of our culture, the sickness of this world is simply reflected in the stories that we tell, and we're creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. You want to know where some of this depression comes from. You want to know where some of this darkness for a future comes from. You want to know why these dystopias and these stories of apocalypse are so appealing, that there are billions of movies and shows and books out there about this. It's because people are only telling that story. Where does hope come from in the midst of not being able to see it? Where does it come from when people believe this is all that is left? When this story is all that there is? Where does hope come from if all that people say is the next generation's possibility is darkness? And where does hope come from if your only vision of the future is in the children that live in this world, is in the world itself, is in this created order and nothing else? You see, the stories that we believe in, the stories that we tell from these old books, from these old concepts, from many generations bygone, don't end in the apocalypse. You know, what good is an apocalyptic story? What good is a dystopia if the only people left on the other side are the remnant? You know, if in the process of getting to whoever gets to survive, the best among us must die, or the majority of us die, or the earth dies, and all you have is struggle on the other side, what good is that kind of life? The story that we tell doesn't end in Armageddon. This is the story that I read to you from Revelation. You see, this world around you likes to embrace the Armageddon story. The world around you likes to look at the difficulties of what is happening on our planet and say, it's coming. It's happening. People themselves are creating this own reality. But they want to end the story there. They want to end the story with the fallen world, with the apocalypse and the remnant that survives, if any survive at all. But this is not the story that we tell as a people of faith. I'm going to give it to you in a metaphor. Well, I'll start with the story itself. The story that I read to you from Revelation was the story of the proclamation of what happens after Armageddon. You know, the word Armageddon is a Greek appropriation of a Hebrew word, Har Megiddo. Two words, actually. Har meaning mountain or hill, and Megiddo being the name of a place, an actual physical town, a physical space in the Middle East. In the book of Revelation, which is a hybrid of vision of the future, of prophecy, but also of telling of a reality of that time and place, where John used metaphor to compare to living people and also things yet to happen. In this very poetic, visionary sort of telling, he also uses names of places. And one of the ideas that he tells is that sort of at the end of all these things, you know, at the summation of all this war and this conflict, of pestilence, of famine, of all this destruction that comes to the earth, that in the Middle East and in this area of a hillish mountain called Megiddo, surrounded by a plain, which is sort of a crossroads of the ancient Middle East where many cultures and people came together, the people of this world and the powers of darkness will meet with the angels of God and the armies of heaven for one final blowout, but it's not really a blowout because the forces of good destroy the forces of evil. But in the process of destroying the forces of evil, this world is destroyed as well. It is brought to naught. It is brought to nothing. That it is rooted apart from its essence, that all of the atoms that make these things what they are torn asunder, and the earth is made into nothing. And that, my friends, is where the ideas of Armageddon and apocalypse come from. This kind of story of destruction. And if that was the end of this book, if that was the end of our Bible, if that was the end of the story, I would not stand before you and preach. I would not have a reason to have faith in this, because that's a darkness and an evil rather than a goodness. There's nothing worthwhile out of complete destruction. But the story doesn't end at Megiddo, at Armageddon, at apocalypse. The story ends at a new birth, a new city, a new earth that God creates from the destruction, out of the destruction, out of the death, out of the bodies and the people who are no longer breathing. God creates new life. He re-embodies the people of the spirits of the people who went before. He creates out of the atoms and the destruction a new earth and a new Jerusalem. He creates new life where there is no more death, no more pain, no more war, no more famine, no more pestilence. He creates what was wrong and makes it right. That is the story that we tell in our scriptures. And now I want to give it to you in a couple of metaphors. For you see, this story of hope, which has become old, which has stopped being believed in by a majority in our culture, which is a story that gets corrupted and ends at apocalypse, ends at death, ends at the killing of your heroes in our modern day, in our modern time, in our 21st century America, that they have taken it and twisted it and ended the story far too early and ended it only in this world. You see, the story in a metaphor is like a farmer's field. See, this is the message I want you to hear for a minute, brothers and sisters. Our God, though this is a message that goes beyond our ability to notice and witness and measure, our God has given us billions of examples of what this looks like in this life. The kingdom of God has broken into this world, but we have a difficulty of believing it because we can't measure it in the same ways that we can some other things. And so he gives us all these examples, like a farmer's field. When you go out this time of year and all the crops have been plucked from their shoots, and the shoots have been torn from the ground, and the ground has been laid barren, and then the barrenness, they have taken large metal instruments and tore the soil over and over, so much so that when you walk into a farmer's field, if you're a child especially, though we know after many years of living what will happen, when you see it, you can't possibly believe new life can come from it. Out of this torn and broken earth, out of taking the soil itself and ripping it asunder, is the seeds for new life. You see, in the destruction that is a farmer's field, you plant these little seeds, and out of it grows an abundance of newness every single year. Every year you look outside this time of year and you see nothing that looks alive. Trees that all look dead. And if you have a dead tree next to a live tree this time of year, you cannot tell the difference. And yet on those trees already are the miniature buds starting to form, which will be spring and new flowers and new leaves and new life. Every fall, when the trees start to go into that dormant phase, they drop from them these seeds, many of them tiny, infinitesimally small, little things that go beyond our notice, crushed under our feet into the soil. And yet out of these tiny little things that appear dead, brown and lifeless, we know, because we've measured it, are the atoms of life. And in the soil, with a little bit of warmth and water and sunlight, you start to see new life grow. And from the tiniest of seeds grow the mightiest of trees, of oaks, of things that grow far larger and older than ourselves all around us. And we know now, even from our own ability to measure, that humans come from the tiniest of things as well. Single cells that when combined create this new life of humanity. That the strongest, tallest, fastest, best, wisest among us started as the tiniest of organisms on this planet. You see, the examples are all around you, and more known through the science that we have. And yet, because of the ability to think and the critical thinking that we have, we write these stories off because we can't measure when a story after Armageddon, after apocalypse might happen, because we can't see that new life beyond a person breathing their last in this world. Because we can't have that ability to measure it and put it in front of you in a quantifiable way right now, we don't believe. And yet the world around us, even through our most complex understanding, is full of what we don't understand, full of the infinite knowledge that we cannot ever possibly fully contain. I mean, the greatest science around us now tells us that the universe is expanding faster and faster, and we don't know why. That like a firework going off, it should fade and dissipate and slow down, but instead it's growing in size and in speed and in energy. There's something there that they don't know at all what it is, and so they call it dark energy, but they know that it must be there. Similarly, they know that there's way too much mass in the universe for there to be just the stuff we see and measure, and they have a thing they call dark as well. Dark energy and dark matter, dark mass. Things that are just simply dark because they don't understand, but the evidence is all around that something must be there, even though we can't measure it or understand it. More and more, brothers and sisters, we're reaching up to these moments, to these realities in our midst, where what we know is so limited, but the reality of what is there is abundantly obvious. Brothers and sisters, I say to you, this message of hope is all around you. It's literally planted in the ground outside of you. It is witnessed every spring when new life comes forth. It is witnessed every time a child is born into this world. And isn't it amazing that when you stand in the midst of a new child being born, that the difference between life and death is the width of a hair? It's paper thin for that mother or that child of whether or not they live to see another moment, even in the birth of a new life into this world. And this message that I'm preaching to you is the same about when we leave it. That when we die, whether we see that day when this earth is ripped asunder and remade, or whether we never get there until billions of years beyond what we call a human lifetime, and we only see our own last breath and our own last day on this earth, that whether it is an individual death or the death of this world, that the same thing is happening in all of us. That's that moment, that the difference there between new life and this earth is the difference of new life and a different earth, a different existence, a life beyond this world. It costs us our life in this plane of existence to be a seed of new life in a world beyond here. Think about this, that your body, like the farmer's field, when it has reached its last, when it breathes its last and it is torn asunder, when your soul is no longer contained in this physical form, that it is no different than the farmer's field being plowed once more. That what appears to be death is actually the planting of the new seeds of a new life. That what appears to be destruction is actually newness of birth into a different existence. This is the message of hope that we proclaim in our faith. This is the message of hope that I believe is abundantly around us, proclaimed in the smallest and largest of ways. And this is the message of hope that is lacking in our world today, that is being killed in our comic book superhero stories, that is being twisted in the dystopias that are preached to our preteens and teens, that is being proclaimed as simply the end and the apocalypse of our adult stories for mass media of zombie thrillers. But brothers and sisters, this isn't just benign stories that we're telling to our culture. This isn't just throwaway nonsense that gets repeated time and time again. It is becoming the proclaimed truth. It is becoming the cultural norm. It is replacing the stories of hope. You, if you have any faith, that can let you see even the smallest of those examples around you of perhaps, possibly, even if you can't fully believe, if it's just a possibility that might be true, that there might be a hope beyond this world, that your death might be the planting of a new seed, of a new life, which is greater still than you ever were in this world. If you could see even the glimmer of that hope and that possibility, then you have faith enough to carry it into this world. May you be blessed to believe just that much, if not more, and may you share that story of hope in a world that is starving for it. Amen.